Hey everybody, welcome back to Some Guys Movie Reviews. Today I'm going to be talking about Tenet, Christopher Nolan's latest outing and probably his most divisive film. Let's get started. Alright, so Tenet stars John David Washington and Robert Pattinson as the lead characters. And when I saw this in theater, I have to admit, I did find it kind of confusing. Not necessarily the plot, although the plot does become very complex. But what I found more confusing had to do with the dialogue of the film. To me, it doesn't feel like a traditional movie in the way that dialogue is delivered. I often felt like I was missing context to some conversations. And maybe I was even not picking up on the subtext of conversations. My opinion of that changes more towards the third act once I actually see what's happening. For me, I do really like this movie. I think it's a great movie, but I also understand why it might be considered one of his most divisive films. Let's go into it in more detail. To start out, Christopher Nolan, I have to say, is my favorite director, and the reason that I love him so much is because he's able to take these big budget ideas and make them feel more purposeful or more dialed back, more grounded, more real. Nolan has done this with most all of his films, in fact. He does a great job of making them feel more realistic. And to me, when something's a little bit more realistic, I can relate to it more. And so that's why I really like him as a filmmaker. I love how he's able to blend big ideas with these big budget and then put it together, and it ultimately turns into a blockbuster experience. I really appreciate Nolan for that, and I wanted to say that off the top. John David Washington is really good in this movie. In fact, there are times where he is like Denzel, his father. I'm gonna be honest, the way he delivers some of his dialogue and just, the way he pronounces things, very similar, but I do think he did enough to separate himself from his father, and he did a great job, and he and Robert Pattinson together do a great job in this movie. Robert Pattinson is a highlight for me in this film. He truly shines because you forget that it's Robert Pattinson. He does a great job. Michael Caine's in this, Kenneth Branagh. It's a big cast, and I think they all do really good. I think it goes without saying, Nolan is one of the best at putting together these really big concept action sequences. Right off the bat, we get the action sequence from the trailers where you see them like catapulting onto the building, running up it. Amazing, well shot by Hoyt van Hoytema, I think I pronounced that correctly. And just from the lighting to the way that it just looks cool, I don't know how else to describe it other than it just looks awesome. And so that's one action sequence that's really well done. There's this highway action sequence more towards the middle. This is one that's also in the trailer. You see cars going in reverse and you're like, what is going on here? Really cool stuff. I don't know that I've seen anything quite like that before. And then the other action sequence was one that was also in the trailer, which had to do with an actual giant plane, which they crashed into a building, which was pretty interesting and cool to watch because you could tell it was real. And I'm all for that realism. It makes me feel more immersed in the film, so I really like that. When it kicks in about halfway, you realize what's happening. There's these turnstile machines, and it allows people to travel backwards through time. These turnstiles machines are across the globe. They don't really give reason why they're where they are, but you kind of just have to accept it. And that's one thing I really want to talk about with this movie. You do have to really go in this movie with an open mind. If you go in and you're trying to follow all the logic and make sense of everything, you're probably going to have a hard time getting into this movie because there's a lot at play, and you do have to accept some things, such as these machines just at certain locations, and this specific group, Kenneth Branagh, his organization from the future, knows where they are and how they use this to carry out their missions and stuff. So that's one thing you have to buy into. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump to the third act of the film, where a lot of it started coming together. I think that's where it finally clicked for me, at least in the theater, and then on repeat viewings, it's what's made me want to watch it more so I can pick up on a lot of the little things that happen in the movie. There is this large action sequence with all these different soldiers. One of them's going forward in time, one of them's going back in time, And the way that it's shot, how this building blows up and then it comes back together and blows up again, it's really neat. I've never seen anything quite like it. And it does get a little confusing to watch because you're like, wait, who are these people and which ones are they? So you really have to pay attention. But that doesn't really matter because the action's there. You know that there's a mission in play. You know that our lead characters are trying to prevent this device from ultimately destroying the world. That's kind of up in the air too. You know, they mentioned this MacGuffin device. It's just a device for our lead character to try to get a hold of and prevent the destruction of the world, as I take it. But it works pretty well. I really wanted to highlight Ludwig Göransson's score. I hope I pronounced that correctly. His music is awesome. Nolan has typically had Hans Zimmer do a score. Hans Zimmer was busy doing No Time to Die, and so he got Ludwig Göransson involved in this project, and he delivers such amazing music. It really worked for this movie. It was just like perfect. I really appreciated the music. I thought it added to the film a lot. Again, to the complex nature of the plot, I think that's where this movie loses points. It does become quite complex. I do think that the dialogue can become a little confusing because of the subtext context of certain things that as a viewer you don't really pick up on. Also, while I liked Kenneth Branagh in this role, I think he really is giving it his all as like this quote-unquote Bond villain type. I do think it's a little over the top at times, but he does a good job. Overall, I'm going to give this movie an 8 out of 10. I think it is a great movie, really fun to watch. It can feel a little long, but the good thing is Nolan paces it out pretty well, that I don't know that you feel it as much as maybe in some other longer movies. Also, I'm not sure what you could cut in this movie. It's so jam-packed with all these ideas that if you cut anything, I'm worried that you would be even more lost potentially. So even though it's 2.5 hours, I do think it works. All right, guys, so that's my thoughts on Tenet. What did you think? Comment below, like, subscribe, share, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.